you so much for joining us and welcome to today's webinar, The Healing Power of Pets. This webinar is brought to you today in partnership by Mental Health America, MHA, and HABRI, the Human Animal Bond Research Institute. My name is Jackie Zimmerman. I'm the manager of Public Education Partnerships and e-learning, and I'll be helping to moderate today's session. I have just a few notes for everyone before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to all registrants within 1 week. We currently do not offer CEUs, but if you would like a certificate of attendance, I have a form that you can fill out. I'll put the link to that form in the chat here shortly, and it will also be included in your follow-up email. So if you can't get it out of the chat, no worries. We might have some time for questions, or we might be able to gauge what questions to ask during our session based on your feedback in the chat. So please feel free to ask your questions, make comments, share resources, all kindly and respectfully in the chat as we move forward today. As I had mentioned, today's session is part of a collaborative effort between MHA and HABRI. Together, we have been working in partnership to create some incredible resources really focused on the powerful role of pets, how they can support your mental health, consideration for being a pet owner, about therapeutic support, and many more resources. All of this work has been funded by the American Pet Products Association and World Pet Association, and we want to thank them for helping us create all the materials that I'm sharing in the chat here today on our new Pet Resource Center. That will also be included in your follow-up. But many of the topics that I just kind of mentioned are things we want to uplift into a greater conversation today. And in order to do that, we are joined by some incredible experts who are going to share a little bit about the powerful role that pets can have in our lives. So without further ado, we have three incredible panelists with us today: Helen Brooks, Taylor Chastain Griffin, and Aubrey Fine. And I love if we can just start with some introductions for you to share a little bit about yourself with the audience, who you are, your role, what you're bringing to today's conversation, your relationship with this topic of pets. Taylor, we'll kick it off with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you all who are joining. So exciting to see so many animal lovers from across the globe here. So I have the privilege of making a career out of the human-animal bond. I was a dog trainer back in the day, became a mental health counselor, and then decided that this field that I'm so passionate about needed more championing and advocacy. So I went on to pursue my PhD in research psychology with the goal of helping other people access this the intervention that I believe so much in. So I work with therapy dogs. I share my home with 9 dogs currently, cats. I have chickens, ducks, turtles, goats. I think that's all the different species. So I'm an animal lover through and through, and really excited to talk with you all today.
Thanks, Taylor. Welcome. Aubrey, if you want to go next.
Very good. My name's Aubrey Fine, and I'm excited to be here as well. I'm a native of Canada, and I moved to California in 1981. I'm a licensed psychologist, a professor emeritus now at Cal Poly University, where I taught for 42 years, and I'm an adjunct professor now at Utah State, where we're offering a series of courses on the human-animal bond. A little bit about me, I was involved in the field of animal-assisted interventions or therapy right from the early days. So I've been doing this since the early 70s. But just as an introduction, which I think makes my background a bit more interesting, is as a boy growing up in Canada, I never had animals in my life. My mom was afraid of animals. Therefore, I became uncomfortable. And who would have thought our lives would be blessed by being surrounded by so many species. So I've had dogs, birds, lizards, and at my university we have horses, so I have horse friends. So lots and lots of experiences. So I am excited to be here as well.
Thanks, Aubrey. Happy to have you. And what an interesting fact. Finding those animal connections later in life. I love it. Helen.
Hi everyone, just thank you again for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a professor at the University of Manchester, and my research is focused on the impact that pets have for people with long-term physical and mental health conditions. So we've done quite a lot of primary research, but also synthesized the evidence quite a few times. My relationship with animals is also a little bit different. I completed my first research project on the role of companion animals for people with long-term mental health conditions. And at the time, I was interviewing people who were telling me the really powerful stories about the comfort, the stability, and the meaning that animals brought to their lives. So the project didn't just influence my academic thinking, it really changed my life because I ended up with two dogs. One of those we rehomed, and they both quickly took over our entire lives. So sadly, they've both passed away now, but their impact on me carries on. And I think it's really helped me to understand in a much more in-depth way that the impact on a relationship with a pet can have on people living with long-term health conditions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Helen. And welcome to all of our panelists. We're really grateful to have you here. I know in those intros, we've already started to get a little personal and hear some of your connections to pets and what that has looked like in your life or how you started that interest in the human-animal bond. But I want to talk a little bit about if each of you have a story to share either personal or that you've witnessed a time when you've seen an animal play a role in an individual's mental health or recovery journey specifically. What does that look like? Can you share any of those stories?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it, Aubrey.
So I have lots and lots of stories and books I've written over the years. Um, I even wrote a book called Afternoons with Puppy, which is a tribute to the work of working alongside therapy animals, because during the daytime, I would teach at the university, and in the afternoon, I would do clinical work surrounded by many therapy animals. But, I'm going to take you back right from the beginning, and I'll do this as quick as I can. I had mentioned that I was afraid of animals, and it was in 1972 that I got my first pet. Well, not really my first pet, because what happened was I went and got a mouse, and that was going to be my first pet. But when I brought the mouse to my house, a little Dr. Zeus, what ended up happening was my mom got really frightened, and she started screaming, "Don't drop the rat!" And I remember that day because what I ended up doing is saying, "This isn't going to work." So I went back to the store and said, I'm not going to keep the mouse right now, but I promise you I'll come back. I'm going to leave the cage at home. Long story short, when I went back, I didn't take a mouse. I ended up getting a gerbil, and that gerbil was my first small that changed my life. And I'm going to bring the example in now because at that time I was working for the Quebec Association for Children with Learning Disabilities. And in the early 70s, that term was sort of an umbrella term for so many other developmental concerns. So we had children in that program that had ADHD, learning disorders, high functioning autism today if they were diagnosed. But if you go back with me, September, it was about this time in 1973. I decided to bring Sasha, that was my little gerbil's friend, and I brought her to a program just as my share, because she became my good buddy. I wanted to share this with youngsters, and I directed this program, lots of kids. So it was actually not September, October, it was probably January, February, because it was a cold of a Canadian day. And I brought her to this program. There she was in the cage, and little children started coming to me and saying, "Well, I don't think that's a mouse, Aubrey. What is it?" And I explained it was a gerbil, and they asked a little bit about this. But eventually, some kids said, "Well, could I hold her?" And to be honest with you, remember I said I was all new at this whole experience, and today my life is so much different. So one child was really so good at asking. I said, "You know what? Before the program even starts, come, we're going to go sit down on the side." And I asked him, "Could you sit down, cross your legs? And what I want you to do is I want you to take your palms and put them almost like a bridge. And then I'll place Sasha in your hands." But I said to him, "You got to promise me one thing. You can't move because Sasha's my good buddy and I don't want to scare her." And this was a boy that today would have been diagnosed as having ADHD, very, very impulsive. But he looked at me so sincere and he said, "I promise you I won't, or at least I promise you I'll try that I won't." And so as I put Sasha in his palms, he was very still and she got really comfortable. And then she started to meander up his tummy. And just like you're smiling, Jackie, so was he. And then she went back into his palms and they relaxed a while. This is actually 53 years ago this happened. And let me tell you, I don't remember all the details, but I remember a little boy looking at me and saying, "You see, I promised you I wouldn't move, and I didn't." And that was my aha beginning to this whole field of the power of human animal connections. They connected, and she made a difference that moment. Over the last 50, many years later, I have many situations that have demonstrated that power of the connection, not only in these magnificent outcomes, but just the greetings, the joy of celebrating lives alongside animals. So I'll be quiet because I know we have other people, but I will turn off my mic.
Thank you for that story, Aubrey. It's wonderful. It brought a smile to my face. Taylor or Helen, any stories you want to share?
Yeah, so I've been very lucky over the last maybe 10 years to spend quite a lot of time with people, talking to them about the role that their pets have played. And just to think of some examples to illustrate some of that, one of the people that I spoke to would talk about how their rabbits would, when they were having suicidal thoughts, the thought about what would happen to them if they took their own lives was enough for that person to stop from acting. So that sense of responsibility, that sense of connection was really life-saving in that moment. Another example would be someone with post-traumatic stress disorder telling us about how their dog would intuitively know to come to them in the night if they were experiencing a panic attack. They would lick their face, they would stay close, which really helped to ground them and calm them in a crisis. And like Aubrey said, really, it wasn't like that big overall reduction in symptoms. It was that qualitative impact that's really deeply felt by the people that were living with these animals and experiencing long-term health conditions at the same time.
I love that. I love that. Well, I have some similar stories, and I hope I live out on a farm to make my animal life possible. And I'm seeing a bit of a lag on my side, so I hope it's not interrupting your ability to hear me. But I will never forget the way that animals have made me feel early in my life. And I think I always wondered how animals would help us connect as humans. You find someone else who loves animals. Even in the chat today, we see it. We're connecting in a way we probably wouldn't if we weren't talking about the animals that we love. And some of my early work in this field was actually with incarcerated youth. And I had the just honor of a lifetime to be able to bring therapy animals into that setting where no touch is allowed, no affection, no vulnerability. And my animals, specifically, hilariously, my like silly frilly poodles would have a way of turning these teenage boys back into young children who needed to be seen and heard and understood. And the love that was shared in that setting and the way that those kids grew in their time with therapy animals is really what solidified for me. I have to make this my life's purpose.
It's incredible. I'm getting goosebumps just hearing all these stories because they are so special. And Taylor, to your point, everyone, it brings this sense of connection, community, even while we're virtually here talking about it, seeing the stories in the chat. I love to see it. And that just speaks to the uniqueness of the human animal bond. It is so unique. I'd love to hear from you on what you think makes that bond so unique compared to other types of support.
We're all sitting there looking at each other. So I'll jump in again since I went first the last time. And then, it's a great question. Number one, when we look at animals, many of us don't recognize that cross species relationships are not as uncommon as you think, because it's not only humans that interact with non-human animals. We see this with other species as well. If I can pick on dogs for a moment, when you're looking at the history of domestication, dogs over the thousands and thousands and thousands of years have learned to coexist much more friendlier with humans than any other species. And why is that? Dogs have learned to read our nonverbal behavior. And for sure, the one thing that we recognize is that dogs seem to recognize our emotional levels. And so in times of need, they're there to be comforting. They want to be comforting to you. The other side to this thing is that it's a reciprocal relationship. You know, one of the things I notice with the children, and I mainly only work with children, is that my animals, all the species of animals, when you're kind with them, they seek our attention just like we seek their attention. And so I think it's important for us to realize that it isn't only just magic and hocus pocus, that it really relates to relationships. And when you talk about the bond, this reciprocal mutual relationship that has these benefits, it needs to be reciprocal. You know what I mean? My dog is lying right next to me right now as we speak. But there are times that I go to her and she comes to me. It's that needing of wanting to be around each other. And part of it is work, you know, that you have to demonstrate trust and care, compassion. But for sure, dogs are one example. I had mentioned horses. I've interacted with wild birds, bearded dragons, bunny rabbits. It, it is the connection of wanting to be around. And of course, as I picked on dogs for a moment, their history has really demonstrated their innate compassion that's there.
Yeah. Aubrey, I totally agree. And what you say, I think I've even heard you say it in the past. And it's one of my mottos now about being the person who our dogs think we are. You know, they really bring out the best in us. And I often think too, similar to what you said about how many of us have never been hurt emotionally by an animal. And a lot of us have been hurt by people, you know, and so we tend to feel more safe to bring our vulnerable selves into those interactions. And I think I love to watch people learn how to take care of an animal too, because it really, like we talked about, that softness, that vulnerability, we see ourselves even in the best light when we're in that interaction. And so I've never seen anything else like it in the mental health space and many other spaces where we can have such a motivator to be our best selves and to be with people. I see in the chat over and over again that unconditional love is such a huge part of it. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I was spotting that in the chat as well, Taylor, around that unconditionality, that lack of judgment, which I think came up such a lot in our research projects. And like you say, was often compared to kind of support from other humans. So people would talk a lot about how their relationships with their animals was a lot simpler, a lot less complicated than relationships with other humans in their life. And I think what was also really interesting is that people would talk about not having to kind of articulate what it was they needed from their animals. Their animals just knew what it was that they needed and gave it to them without having to be asked, which I thought was really lovely. I think what else is quite interesting as well, that people talked about how there's kind of lower social risk of engaging with animals. So there was no fear of shame or judgment or misunderstandings that often came up from human relationships. And I know that's been going around the chat a lot as well. So I think it's clearly resonating with people.
You know, I think it's interesting. You all are good at multitasking and looking at chats. I'm trying not to look as much at all the details that are popping up. But you know, when you think about it, science is catching up to what I think most of the people here intuitively know, that animals really are good for our well-being. And I think, you know, when you look at the science side to this, it takes out what I would call the awe or the wonder of our relationships, because there's a tremendous uniqueness in being able to hang out with a bearded dragon, or to hang out with a dog or a horse. My university, Cal Poly, was given to the state of California by Mr. Kellogg, because that was his original Arabian horse center. And people giggle when I say that I have several friends that happen to be 1,100 pounds. My life is so richer when I go visit, and what I always say is, you haven't lived until a horse that might be at the back of a pasture and you just wave runs full gallop to you, not because you're only holding a carrot, because it's almost like cheers. Everybody knows your name. She wants to be there. And when they see my hands, and they see them as this gentle being that's going to, either scratch them, pet them, or just be there in the presence. But because I think that's the most important part of this whole issue. It's relationship building. It's developing this relationship. And in my case, I almost look at being around animals as being like almost as biological spa treatment. All the benefits that we could talk about. I don't have to go get a massage or go to a place that one would say would be super relaxing. I could sit next to my dog and we can in silence be together, and that unison, that connection is super critical. So I'll pass it on.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to describe it, Aubrey. And thank you, Taylor and Helen, for your comments too. It's such a unique and powerful connection, sometimes indescribable. I'm looking in the chat and comments of different ways that people are finding those connections, whether it be with a pet or even a little animal that's near to your house that you see frequently and you rely on seeing those moments of joy, of awe, of appreciation. It's really, really special. And I know we've kind of focused on this pet relationship. And some people in the chat have started to mention if they've had therapy dogs or service dogs, or animals who have provided a different type of support. But I want to explore what that looks like too, in a sense of what can incorporating animals into therapeutic or maybe clinical mental health settings look like, if folks haven't experienced that before or interested in that.
Yeah, I love that question. And I see many people in the chat who are fellow mental health professionals or educators. And so I am very fortunate to have my dream job as the executive director of an organization called the Association of Animal Assisted Intervention Professionals, or AAAIP. And so we are here to help people do that. We have certification, we have education, we have standards of practice to make sure that all of us as professionals are bringing therapy animals in a meaningful way that protects their safety and well-being, but then also, promotes best practice. It's an organization I have to give credit. Dr. Aubrey Fine was with our board of directors at Pet Partners, which is our sister organization, serves volunteer handlers. We were talking about this just the other day, but I believe it was 2016, 2017, and he was saying, listen, we need a place for professionals to come together and advance this field. And so that when someone's getting started, they also know what to Google and know how to get started. And so we got to bring Dr. Aubrey Fine's call to life in this association, and we're here to support that journey along the way. So whether you're a provider who's looking to do this or you're someone who's looking for services, then we encourage you to find a professional who's gone through our program. It's offered internationally, and it's really changing the landscape of the intervention and professional way with therapy animals.
If I could jump in just by piggybacking, I think Taylor is bringing up an important point, and that is that there are lots of resources out there that can help support you to do this work if we're looking at working alongside therapy animals. And I have to say this, that some people get overzealous or very overexcited and say, yeah, well, anyone can do this. But just for a moment, I have to plug the important term, which is the welfare of the animals that we work along. Because 53 years ago, I was a lot younger. I had a lot more hair, and I was a lot thinner in those days. And I think of the fact that I didn't understand what animal welfare was as a terminology, but I learned very, very, very quickly that I was the voice of Sasha when she went to that program. And so what Taylor is suggesting is the fact that if you're interested in learning to do this, there are places that you can get resources and support. Personally, when people would come to my office, it was like coming into the world of Dr. Dolittle. In my early years, I had dogs, bunnies, cockatoos in a clinical office. So what was it like for a child and a family that came in being greeted at the door by a golden retriever, and maybe a cockatoo at one point would come and sit on one of my Golden's backs? And I remember her so well. She would say, come on back with me. Could you imagine a child's eyes going, whoa, what's this like? But the part that's really important to me is the recognition of how the animals contribute to the milieu, the safety, the warmth, the comfort. You talked about unconditional love of a pet in the home. Well, what's it like when you're becoming emotional, or a person coming to a therapy visit for the first time? Well, if a golden retriever or a Labrador comes over to you and says, it's going to be okay, and makes you feel at ease with some of the things that we've started to allude to, it's a very important outcome. But doing this again, today it's a different world. Having resources that Taylor talked about is really important.
Just to add to that, Ulrich, and that's such an important point. And one of the things that came up in our review quite a bit was that people felt much more comfortable with their pets with them in therapy situations. So that's definitely something we've identified as well as being really important. On the other side, as particularly in the UK, people would tell us that their animals, their relationships with their pets were really not included in healthcare planning discussions. So their health professional just wasn't aware of how important these animals were to them. And that was a real big barrier. So the people that we spoke to spent a lot of time thinking about ways that they might be able to incorporate those relationships with their pets into the discussions with health professionals about making sure that their their pet was cared for, say if they had to go into hospital. So people would talk quite a bit about not taking up treatment or not going into hospital settings because they didn't want to leave their animals on their own, and that wasn't being incorporated sufficiently within health services in the UK, particularly.
Yeah, thank you for that point, Helen. And Aubrey and Taylor for your insights. I know we probably do have a lot of clinicians on the call who might be interested in how can I start to include this. Taylor put a link to her organization in the chat, and I will be sure that all of those types of resources you all will get in your follow-up so that you can start to dive a little deeper if it's something that you want to learn more about. I know there have been some additional questions in the chat beyond these clinical settings about workplaces, schools. I saw some folks chatting about community programs they've been a part of, or school programs, library programs with dogs. Those are such incredible ways. I wanted to hear from our panelists a little bit about how some of those settings, workplaces, schools, community programs, can integrate animals in a safe and supportive way.
Sure, well, I can get us started. So, it's important that we keep in mind those standards are so essential no matter where we're bringing animals in. I think we're finally moving away from this idea of anyone can throw a vest on a dog and call it a working animal. Mainly not just because there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, but because of that welfare piece. Not all dogs want to be in public settings. Ask me how I know. I have 9 dogs for a reason, and even ones who look very promising as therapy dogs in the beginning sometimes prefer the life of being a couch potato, and that is okay in my house. But so, if you're going to look into bringing therapy animals or any kind of animal programming into where you work, where you go to school, wherever you fellowship, look for organizations that have those standards in place. So I mentioned Pet Partners. That's our sister organization where we have volunteer teams all around the globe, and they have people who are trained. They have followed best practices. They're advocates for their animals. The animals are, healthy and showing willingness to come into those settings. So you can bring in a volunteer therapy animal program just about anywhere. You can connect with us at Pet Partners to find volunteers. And maybe some of you have animals who would be a good fit for this work. They are the kinds who are really, like to meet new people, are confident outside of the home. So consider volunteering with your pet. Consider elevating them to be a therapy animal, and bring them to serve your community in other places. I'm sure Aubrey and Helen have more ideas, but I'm always thinking about how our handlers can just make the world such a better place. And there's so many, they love to be invited into many places in the community.
Over the years, I've met many people that have volunteered in this capacity where they take their animal and visit. And I want people to recognize the significance of these opportunities, not only for the people that are volunteering that perhaps get tremendous joy of sharing their animals' gifts with others, but the tremendous gifts that we give others when we visit with them, because animals can provide opportunities that maybe our human folks can't. Like, for example, an animal can come up to you and snuggle. But I think of so many events, and I think of one little girl that was in a hospital, and she had cancer, and she was visited by a therapy dog that she didn't know, right? But there she was shouting as she saw this dog walking down the hallway and saying, "Hey, I like dogs. Can he come visit me?" And it ended up that they developed a super relationship. And there was a time, in fact, that when she got really a little bit better, but still was dealing with cancer, she was visited by that dog handler at her home. And the little girl went with the handler and the dog to a ceramic shop. It was around Valentine's Day, and they were going to make a Valentine's gift for the family. And the girl was really uncomfortable being in the public because she was bald, and so she had this baseball cap on, and she actually had a little tattoo on her forehead. And when she got there, she sat very quietly working on a ceramic project, which with this dog and in this case the handler. And as they were working together, some kids came over and they said, "How did you bring your dog here? I'm really excited that she's here." And first, she didn't want to really talk a lot, but the kids were really friendly. And she finally looked and said, "He's not my dog. I guess I have to tell you." And she took off her cap and she said, "I have something called cancer." She was about 8 or 9 years old. "And he's not my dog, he's her dog, but he's my best friend." And so, again, the point that I'm bringing up is there are many, many places where we can see people volunteering with their animal. We want to make sure that the animal still has those trained behaviors that make them more effective in that relationship. The affiliative nature, wanting to be there, being reliable and consistent with the behaviors that we're going to see. But I could share with everyone, just like I'm sure that everyone could open up right now and tell us stories about either what they've witnessed personally or have received or have actually been involved with on how animals have supported people in any number of these environments that we're talking about. The world is so much different than when Sasha went to visit 53 years ago, because today we hear about this. We hear about the animals that are at disaster areas. I was at the airport 2 weeks ago in another city. We won't say the city, and a lady had a therapy dog there, and she says, "Well, would you like to pet my dog?" She didn't know who I was. And I just smiled and I interacted with the dog and we chatted and I just listened, because for that moment I was enjoying that experience, recognizing, of course, that I've met many, many dogs at airports that do this work, and I understand why. But for that moment, I was as excited as the 7-year-old that met the dog too. So I'll pass it on to Helen or somebody else.
I don't have a lot to add. I find that really, really fascinating and helpful. I think the only thing that I thought was, in addition, you might consider kind of community partnerships. So collaborating with perhaps animal rescue centres or urban farms, which might reduce some of the cost and burden, but still give you that interaction with animals as well.
You know, I do see, and I just wanted to comment. I see an individual that mentioned that she had cancer and that she had a hedgehog that wouldn't leave her side. And I want to say this only if anyone's ever interested, I can share you this story that I have written about. My wife had breast cancer, and 2 weeks before her surgery, we got a golden retriever, and that golden retriever was named Magic. And I have never seen the most unique relationship that when my wife was going through her recovery, Magic was this little puppy that would nudge her. And then the neatest thing that they began doing was they held hand and paw together. Originally, at first, they said, "Wow, this is kind of neat." They did that for 12 years, many times a day, for their lifetime of Magic's life. Magic was inspirational in providing that support. So I just wanted to comment on one of the comments that I read there. So lots of unique opportunities.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. And I know I've seen multiple like that in the chat. And it's that intrinsic nature that animals seem to have to know when we need them most in those moments, and they can be such a calming force. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad that your wife had that support at that time. It's just a different kind of support and comfort.
And I have to
Beautiful.
say that she's doing well now and
Good.
12 years free of cancer too.
Amazing. Good to hear. I know that Aubrey, in your last story, you talked about a young girl who it wasn't her dog, but she had that support from a dog. There might be folks on the call here today that might not have a pet, might not have access to a pet, or be in the position to own a pet in this moment. But are there other ways that you can encourage folks to experience the benefits that we've talked about today of that human-animal bond?
So I suppose in the UK we have opportunities where we might go and be able to walk rescue dogs. So maybe not having like taken on a pet themselves, the full responsibility of that, but being able to walk rescue animals, or like I said, going out to visit urban farms or rescue shelters. Also, there's quite a lot of borrowed companionship in the UK where there's websites where you can register to look after somebody else's dog when they're on holiday. So lots of different opportunities for that animal interaction without having to take on the full responsibility of caring for a pet themselves.
And taking care of a pet can be very challenging too, right? So there's a lot of responsibility, but I agree with Helen. There's so many other options, including uh, uh, pet shelters to begin with. Look for volunteers to walk for the socialization opportunities. How many people that I've seen that feel that they're giving a second leash on life to the dog at the shelter, but when they walk away, they go, "Wow, this was wonderful for me." What's it like to go just to a park and meet animals like dogs that are going on a walk, or just being in nature and having that opportunity? So if people are interested in that portion, I think it's important to recognize that there are options there. And I think that one of the things that I see, especially for people in assisted living who may have had pets all of their lives and now they have lost some of that opportunity, agencies sometimes will bring animals in to visit. And the recognition of standing up and saying, "Hey, I like that opportunity." So one should not feel that the opportunities to interact with animals can't occur if they don't have their own, or their reasons in their lifestyle that they don't have it. And I think, Ellen, your point of maybe babysitting an animal that for a short while, going to places where you can just be among animals. Like I love going to like a walk that I take Mystic, and there's all kinds of animals around, and that's that biophilia, that being around nature and animals. So there are the opportunities that one should have, and I think it's an important outlet for all people to at least have an opportunity.
I'm certainly doing that now that I don't have dogs of my own. I'm borrowing other people's, whether on holiday or going to the parks to meet other people's dogs. And it's a nice way of still getting some of that animal interaction without having pets of your own, which hopefully I will do again in the future soon.
Amazing. And I even saw in the chat some comments about bird watching and different ways that you can sit outside and take in nature. And those are all such great reminders too. I love those. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Helen and Aubrey, for those suggestions. A few I'm going to take for myself because at the time I am also not a pet owner. I have been and hopefully soon will be, but I do enjoy pet sitting for friends, and I need to connect with the local shelter because it's just such a great reminder. I want to talk as we're talking about, building connections, spending time with pets, um, even going to the shelter, getting out, going to parks. It seems like there's that role that animals play in helping build community. So I'd love to hear from each of you about how you see the role animals playing in that social connection, building of community, especially for people that might feel isolated or might be in more rural areas.
Could I jump real quick and then the term social capital is something that we basically recognize that animals provide, and that is, people have capital. You could say I have a lot of money, I have a lot of toys and things like that. Animals can be that catalyst of engagement. So I'll make fun of myself because my wife always um, uh, giggles because we could be walking down the street and I might not have my dog with me, but someone has a golden or a different dog that I see. And the first thing my wife looks at me, she says, I know this is going to come out of your mouth. I come and say, how old's your dog? What kind of dog is it? What's your dog's name? And we start to talk. Um, the notion that having an animal in having animals in our community is a very important one. Why do we have green belts built now into cities? Because people recognize it provides this atmosphere that is what I call more humane, safer, it looks calmer. And so the notion of living our worlds amongst others, not only humans, I call it two-leggers, four-leggers, sliders, wingers, because all animals can be a blessing, can enrich our lives. One of the challenges today, and then I'm going to look at a technology part. One of the challenges today is that we're so used to technology as being how we entertain ourselves or interact. There's a whole world out there with fresh air that we can open up with. So I think that's an important asset. But the other side to this is people sometimes celebrate the relationships that we have with animals just by watching TV shows, programs that show animals live. So you can go to Africa and watch elephants because they have live cameras in that environment, or you could see the eagle being born in Big Bear in California. That was a big deal in where I was. They had cameras watching for months as the eggs were hatching. So I'll be quiet again. But the social capital, the importance of animals enriching our communities and engaging in that way and recognizing to reach out is something that's very important. And I've seen people that have been isolated and felt lonely, and the greatest gift that they had was the ability to be surrounded with animals. And last comment, during COVID, one of the research studies that was, I thought, a wonderful outcome was that, sure, people talked about the animals in life for companionships, taking walks, but several people in a study talked about the need to be touched when they were isolated and lonely. Being next to an animal, snuggling, petting was so important to them. So again, another comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love that. And I love, we're all talking in the chat about the friends we make through our dogs. I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but you become an adult and it becomes really hard to make new friends, to find places where you could socially connect with people, and to overcome some awkwardness sometimes. You don't just go to a restaurant and go sit at someone else's table and meet them. And so our dogs and other animals really give us that excuse to connect. And I love it when my dog connects with someone when we're out and about and gives me a reason to say hi. And we love looking across both of our organizations, Pet Partners and AAAIP, what a community is built around animal lovers, how we'll come together and work together for a shared mission. And I've seen some of the most meaningful friendships and social connections come from that. So whether it's our animals helping to facilitate, past that awkwardness that can sometimes happen as two people interacting in the world, or if we're just really saying, let's rally around this cause that we really care about, it's just such a connecting factor.
As well, I wanted to add that not only are our pets kind of connecting us to new relationships, people also tell us that they help improve existing relationships. So being able to communicate more openly with friends or family because their pet's there, or coming together in terms of shared ownership of an animal as well, has been really important. But people would also talk about integration to the community as well. So through having to walk their dogs in their local areas, they stay connected to things like the church being rebuilt or new community development. So I think it's really, really interesting the range of different ways that our pets are acting as those social conduits.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And yes, I love seeing in the chat too, everyone sharing how they've made those social connections through their pets. My partner and I always joke that everyone in our apartment building seems to have a dog, except for us, which I guess we're up next. But it's such a great way to meet other people in our building of who is this? Who are you? You know, starting those conversations that you might otherwise be nervous to have, or it just feels a little more approachable. It's such a great in-way of connection, and it's really great. Um, I know we have about 10 minutes left. This hour's flying by. Before we wrap up, there's one question, and it's come up a few times in the chat that I want to bring to our speakers, talking about dealing with grief from the loss of a pet. I know that can be incredibly hard, especially if you're already struggling with your mental health and you're really relying on your pet for that mental health support, for that emotional support. And when we lose anyone who's really important to us and that provides that type of support, it can be really challenging. I just love to hear from our speakers if they have any advice on grief dealing with pets. What can be helpful in those times of grief or preparing for that, that anticipatory grief that someone had mentioned too.
This is it's such a hard topic, isn't it? And having been through it myself relatively recently, I can really appreciate the kind of the depth of devastation and that it feels, and even that, like you say, the anticipatory grief as well, it is really devastating. I think my advice is, I guess, not to try and just take it day by day. That's what helped me as well, and sitting with not trying to expect yourself to be recovered really quickly. I think what a lot of people will tell you as well is, and I experienced this myself, is that often people don't understand the loss. So perhaps you don't get the support or sympathy from others that you might get if you're grieving somebody else in your life. So recognizing that and trying to find someone that will understand it and speak to them. But I don't know if other people, Aubrey or Taylor, have any advice, but it is incredibly difficult and I really do sympathize.
This is, the hardest part about getting an animal is that in most cases we will outlive them. There's an old saying, love in your heart wasn't meant to stay, love in your heart was meant to give away. And people say to me, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you fall in love with an animal, and then when the animal passes away, you have that empty feeling? And I wrote a children's book called Give a Dog Your Heart. And in essence, we talk about, we know two things in life. We know the beginning, and we usually celebrate beginnings, and the ending can be very challenging. And I tell people to hold on to the middle, and that's the lifetime. And so the movie Coco always gets me to think about this more. Remember Me. 2 years ago, 2 days from now, October the 2nd, I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean going to give a talk in Canada. And I was called because my older golden retriever that time, her name was Ketsi, wasn't doing well. And in the pitch darkness of the ocean, I was able to figure out how we were going to connect. And I stayed on the phone with her as she passed away. And I remember telling telling her, but telling the veterinarian that was there with her, I remember telling Ketsi, you're going to hear my voice. And then I said to her, honey, it's time to go to sleep now, but I'm not going to leave you until we say goodbye. And was that hard for me? Absolutely. But I felt it was so important for me to be there with her. And ever since then, I've gone around the world. And it was interesting. When I went to New Brunswick, I found a place and I lit a candle for her. And now every city that I go around the world lecturing, I light a candle at different churches, synagogues, every place, just in memory of her. And then I do one for everybody else. And I think, again, is it easy? No, there are things that we can talk about. People can paint, people can write books. You can do many, many ways to celebrate life. But my commentary is, it's not going to be easy, but we recognize that love is important and love is hard. And that is part of that relationship. So talk with people. There are support groups. Many veterinarian hospitals have contacts. Many universities in the United States, that vet schools have a grief hotline that you can contact. So if people are interested, if you want to send me a note, because this is something that I'm very personally committed to, I would be happy to share things that I have that they can have. So sorry, it was a good topic to bring up.
Yeah, you make us cry though, Aubrey. I saw tears in our eyes, and I think everyone can just feel that. I've lost many animals along the way doing this work that I do, but everyone who's ever heard me speak, I talk about Lucy, my heart dog. And when she was gone, it felt like the world shouldn't keep spinning. She was such an important part of my life. But, I do find so much comfort in thinking about how her legacy can live on, because every time I want to be a better person or help another animal, I think about how she helped me be that person. And I always encourage you, it's a heavy kind of thing, but something that's been so just meaningful for me when I was really struggling. I wrote a letter to myself about like, what do I think Lucy would want me to know in this moment? And then the lessons from her are rippling on forever, and they'll always matter. And so that love doesn't die. And I think that can be so healing to lean into.
Thank you all for such beautiful words on a really challenging topic. And it's hard, but it's one that as pet owners is is one of those realities that we don't want to have to think about, but we'll encounter. And so thank you for that advice. It's really, really heartwarming to hear. And yes, the support is so important. I loved each of your points about finding someone who will understand your grief and really leaning into those areas of support is really important. To finish off, I know we have just about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to sneak in one last quick question so we can end on a bright spot note. We have a lot of people on the call who it sounds like have pets. We might have some folks that don't have pets and now are inspired or are thinking about this. Is this something for me, myself included? I'm just eager for a pet. But what advice would you give to someone who is considering bringing an animal into their life to provide that emotional support?
Such a great question. I'm the worst enabler, so don't ever talk to me if you're thinking about getting a pet. If you were in my community, I'd probably drop a pet off at your house if I knew where you lived, because I tend to be the matchmaker. But I do encourage people to really do research about the species and about the breed that you're working with, because there's a compatibility piece there. I've learned along the years the kind of energy level that works for me. I've learned the kind of energy level that doesn't work for me. I love all animals, but there really is a piece of that. So thinking very honestly about what kind of energy level, what traits do you like? Go visit with people who have that species or that breed, and then write like a letter to your local rescue groups describing the personality of the kind of animal that you want. And the animals who are in foster homes can sometimes make the most beautiful matches to you from people who know them well. So that's always my go-to from someone who's had more dogs than sense throughout my life.
The other side that's funny that you think of the dating game, that it is relationship related. But I do think that sometimes people jump into this. Yeah, I think of the first dog that I ended up getting, how excited I was. And I probably would never get a dog like that again, doing it that way. That Goldie was a terrific dog. I have a scale that I wrote in one of my books that we've used with parents, with families, called the lifestyle questionnaire on pet adoption. And so it's a series of questions that kind of help you problem solve the types of animals that you might want to adopt. I think that it is important to recognize, and I know that what I'm going to say is going to be a little bit of a hard comment. One has to think about, when you're going to adopt a pet, that you're going to be with that pet for a long time. I'm hoping that's the goal. And so you want to think through this. Impulsivity is terrific when you say, oh, geez, I really want to do this. But if you can think about your lifestyle, where you live, your finances, all of these things come into play. But don't deprive yourself of the opportunity. As Irv Robbins once said, I have many different ice creams. Not every one of my ice creams is popular with everyone, but I know I have one ice cream that you're going to love. And let me tell you, when you find that ice cream, you go back and back and back. And that's what I'm hoping that all of us will take a look at. From a person that was afraid, never had an animal, to looking at the animals as the greatest gift in my life with my family, because they are my family, and I think it's important. So I'll pass it on to everybody else again.
don't have a lot to add to that. It was excellent advice, really helpful. And that compatibility, thinking about that is really so important. And I guess the only thing I could think to add is maybe start small if you're not sure. Start with a smaller animal, or think about people that might be able to help support you in that ownership as well. Might be able to look after an animal if you're away. So thinking about backup strategies as well.
I love that. It's a really thoughtful decision, and there's so many things to take into consideration. Your time, your ability to care for another animal, what animal would provide you with what you're needing in terms of support. All of those are great, but I love Aubrey's point of if that's something that you're ready for, that you can take on, not depriving yourself of that, enjoying our time with pets and animals. And there have been so many incredible suggestions from our speakers today of if you're not ready to have a pet that you own, how you can still benefit from the human animal bond, which I think is such a special connection that all of us can speak to have in our lives in some way or another. I just want to, I know we're right at the end of our time. I want to give a huge thank you to our panelists. To Helen, Taylor, and Aubrey, thank you so much for being here. Your insights, your knowledge, your stories have been so appreciated. I know they have touched me. I know they've touched those joining, everyone in the chat. And I want to give that second thank you to everyone who is joining us, who shared your own stories. Reading through those was equally healing. Sharing this space and time with you all has been wonderful. I want to remind everyone that this is being recorded. So if you want to go back and listen, or if you want to share it with others that you think would benefit, you'll get the link to the recording in 1 week. You'll also get links to some resources, or MHA Hub that I had mentioned. A lot of the questions about specific resources, we have those included in the hub. So I'll make sure we highlight those when I send that in the follow-up, and also any additional materials. I know that Taylor had shared about her organization. Any additional resources from our speakers will be coming your way. So keep an eye out for those so that you can continue to dive into this topic, into pets and our mental health. You can explore what that connection could look like for you. And we just hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Maybe find that time for you and an animal today to brighten your afternoon up. And one last special thank you to Aubrey, our incredible partners on making this happen, and to our speakers today for sharing your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your afternoon. We'll now be closing out. Everyone keep an eye for that follow-up.